Hi, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com. Today we are going to make a tea fruit cake, and this is what it looks like. This cake is wonderfully moist and it's so flavorful. It's full of dried fruit, candied mixed peel, chopped nuts, ground spices, and what I love, it is just so easy to make. So the first thing that we need to do is we're actually going to soak our dried fruit in tea, hot tea. That's why it's called a tea fruit cake. I do recommend doing this. I actually do it the night before, soak and let it soak for like 8 to 12 hours. That way it gives enough time for the dried fruits to absorb the tea and so that they become really plump and juicy. So what you need to do first is we need tea. We need 1 cup, which is 240 milliliters, 240 grams of hot tea. Now, I've already done this. You want it strong and so that it's nice and flavorful. So it not only is it used to make our fruit nice and plump and juicy, it actually adds some flavor. You know, normally with a traditional fruit cake, we would be soaking our fruit in alcohol. This is no alcohol in this cake, it's tea. So what I've done, I'm just using for 1 cup of hot water, you need hot boiling water. I'm using just a tea bag. And I like to, what I do, as you can see here, I put it in a cup of boiling water. I put my tea bag in and then I just put a plate on top and I let it steep for, I think it was about 5 minutes because we want it nice and strong. Now, you can really use any flavor of tea that you want. I like to use a black tea, so that's like English breakfast and Earl Grey, something like that. But really, you can experiment and use whatever type you want. So that's what I've done. And I think I let this steep so it's nice and strong. So we'll just take our tea bag out. Don't want to wreck that one, like that. And then in a bowl, you will need 1/2 cup, which is 100 grams of firmly packed light brown sugar. We're actually going to sweeten our tea now, and that's actually then will sweeten our fruit because this is the only sugar that the cake's going to have. And then what I'm going to do is just pour over my hot tea. Now I will say, you know, some of us, I'm just going to stir that, do like a little booze in our fruit cakes. If you do, then you could add a couple tablespoons, you know, rum, whiskey, if you want. But I'm going to make this non-alcoholic, so I'm not going to do that today. And then you will need 1/2 pound, which is 225 grams of dried fruits. Now, there's all kinds of dried fruits you can use here. My favorite for a fruit cake is I'm using a combination of the dark raisins, golden raisins, and currants. But, you know, you could add some dried cherries, dried cranberries, some dried mango or apricot, you know, whatever you want. So I just want to dissolve the sugar, and then I'm just going to dump all my dried fruits right in there. Oh, get them all. Stir it. Make sure, I like to get all the fruit under the tea, like so. And then I'm just going to cover it. Now, plastic wrap, you could just put a plate over top of that or a clean dish towel and let it sit. So that, like I said, I mean, you don't have to let it sit 8 to 12 hours, but that kind of, to me, is enough time for that fruit to really get plump and juicy. So I actually did this ahead of time, so this is what it looks like. As you can see, there's still some tea left, but you know, a lot of it has been absorbed into our dried fruit. So we are ready to make our batter. So I'm just going to clean up here and we'll be right back. So now we are ready to make our batter. So first, preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 180 degrees Celsius. And then you will need a loaf pan. This is 8.5 by 4.5 by 3 inches deep. So that's 21.5 by 11.5 by 8 centimeters. And you can just spray the inside of your loaf pan, or I'm going to butter it. So I've got a little melted butter here. I'm going to take a pastry brush and just brush the bottom and the sides. Make sure you get into the corners. We don't want the cake to stick to our pan. And then what I like to do is just take a little piece of parchment, put it in, and you can just flip it over, or what I'm going to do is just lightly butter that so that it doesn't stick, the paper doesn't stick to the bottom of our cake. So there, that's that. So, like I said at the beginning, dump and stir, which I love. The first thing I'm going to do is I have 3/4 of a cup, which is about 100 grams of, I'm using candied mixed peel, which is lemon and orange peel. And I'm also going to add some candied cherries because I love candied cherries. And I did chop up my cherries. Some people don't like the candied cherries. Some people don't even like the candied mixed peel. If you don't, then you don't even have to add this. But to me, a fruitcake has to have it. So I'm just going to dump that right in with our dried fruit. And you know, I make this cake year-round, not just at Christmas time. And a lot of times you can only find the candied fruit at Christmas time. So what I do it like after Christmas. It typically goes on sale. So I buy like a year's supply. Just check the expiry date. And that way, if you want, you can make fruitcake all year. And we also need 1/2 cup, 50 grams of chopped nuts. I'm using pecans today, but you could use, walnuts, almonds, hazelnuts. If you don't like nuts in your fruitcake, you could just leave that out. I did toast the nuts, and the reason I do that, I find it really brings out their full flavor. So what I just did is put the nuts on a baking sheet, pop them into the oven, 6-8 minutes, just until you start to smell them, and then take them out, let them cool, and then what I've done is just roughly chop them. And I'm just going to dump them in there too. As you can see, this is going to be loaded with fruit and nuts, which is my favorite type of fruitcake. So, for our dry ingredients, I have in a bowl 1.5 cups, which is 195 grams of all-purpose flour, plain flour. To that, I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of baking powder, 4 grams, 1/4 teaspoon, 1 gram of baking soda, and 1/4 teaspoon, 1 gram of fine kosher salt, or you could use the table salt. And I like a little bit of spice in my fruitcake. Some people don't, so you can just simply leave it out. Some people like it. I'm just very lightly spicing it, but you can feel free to up it or reduce it, the amount. I'm adding 1/4 teaspoon of ground cinnamon, 1/4 teaspoon of ground ginger, and 1/4 teaspoon of freshly grated nutmeg. If you like some cloves, you could add, maybe 1/8 teaspoon of ground cloves. This is a nutmeg. You buy it typically in the spice section of your grocery store. I like to use a whole one, and then I just use my grater to, just grate it, like so. Again, if you can't find it or you don't really like nutmeg, just leave it out. It's not a big deal. And just going to mix that in. So what the other wet ingredients is, I have 1/4 cup, 55 grams of melted butter. I melted it and now it's cooled down to room temperature. You could use salted or unsalted here. And I'm just going to dump that in. Just dump everything in. And I have 1 large egg, and you want that at room temperature. A large egg is 50 grams out of the shell. I'm just going to lightly beat that with a wire whisk. You can use a fork. And dump that in. I'm going to switch over here to my large. I'm going to move this so it's here. Stir that in, and then dump our dry ingredients. Don't you love it? I mean, no mixer, very easy. You might want to double the recipe. This freezes so well. So I'm just going to stir this in. Okay, that looks good. Just make sure all that flour is moistened. Just pour it in to our cake pan. And smooth the top. So this is going to need to bake, I'm going to say between 55 and 65 minutes. The reason I give a range is, as you always hear from me, everybody's oven is a little different. You know, so if I say 55 at the low range, I would even check it before that because, you know, some people's ovens run quite hot. So I would check it, you know, maybe at 50 minutes just to kind of see where you're at. And, you know, besides, the toothpick test is best you put into the center. But also when you're first testing, you can just take your finger and touch the center of the cake and see if it's still soft. I mean, if it's really soft, you can tell it's not baked enough. So I'm going to say 55 to 65 minutes. I do like to rotate my pan front to back about halfway through baking. That gives a nice even bake. Okay, so our tea fruit cake is ready. So put your pan on a wire rack. As you can see, it didn't rise a lot because this is a dense and moist cake, but it will crack. And when you insert a toothpick into the center, it will come out clean. So what I'm going to do is let it just cool in the pan, about 10 minutes, and then when we come back, I'll take it out of the pan. So now to take the cake out of the pan, what I first like to do, I've got an offset spatula, you just use a knife. Just go around, make sure it's not sticking. And then out of the pan. And see, because I buttered the paper, it didn't stick to the bottom of the cake. And then I'm just going to flip it around like so. So now you want to let that cool completely. You can eat it the day it's baked, but I find it's a little crumbly, the texture's a little crumbly. So I do recommend, once it's cooled down completely, covering and storing it at least overnight. And I find that way it has time to all come together. And as you can see from this one, I made this about 3-4 days ago. And so this is what it looks like. So I do recommend doing it. Actually, you can store this cake probably at least a week at room temperature or in the fridge. You can also store it in the freezer. If you want to freeze it, what I like to do is before I put it in the freezer, I slice it into individual slices. You can put even a little bit of wax paper or parchment paper between the slices so that if you wanted just one slice out of the freezer, you can just take it that way. But we'll stop talking and we will try it. Now, I will admit, when I'm home by myself, not on camera, I do like it with butter on it. It's really good. Not to say it's not good without butter, but it is. It is wonderfully moist and so flavorful. You know, the tea adds, it's a subtle flavor, but it does flavor the fruits. And then you've got the chopped nuts, you've got the candied fruit, you got just a little bit, like we put in just not a lot of ground spices, but just enough to add a really nice flavor. So, make this any, I know typically a lot of people just make fruit cake at Christmas, but if you're like me and like it all year round, try it that way. So I do have quite a few other fruit cake recipes. I know some people I do have the round one where you soak it, you know, brush it with alcohol every couple weeks so that alcohol permeates through the cake and you have that wonderful flavor. And I do have a light fruit cake. I think I have like a buttermilk fruit cake where it doesn't have eggs. So there's two ways you can find our recipes. One is to go to our YouTube channel, Joy Baking. The one thing that can be it can be hard to find all of the recipes. So you can go to our joybaking.com website. You can click on cake, say if you want a cake recipe. Click on the link to the cakes. You have all the cake recipes. And what's great about the website is not only do you have the picture and the link to the YouTube channel, you have the whole written recipe and you have the link to the print page where you can print it off. So I recommend, we have I think there must be at least 120 cake recipes. I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 fruit cake recipes. So check it out. And also the other thing, if you subscribe to the channel, people are still emailing me and that and saying, I'm not getting notified when you have a new video. And that can happen. So what YouTube has done is, beside the subscriber button on our YouTube channel, there's there's a bell. And so just press that bell and that will make sure you're notified of our new videos. So try this, and until next time, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com.